More than a century ago, Titanic, the revered and unsinkable ship, struck an iceberg and sank 2.5 miles into the depths of the Atlantic Ocean. For decades, the world thought it was lost forever.
I think Titanic was one of those great mysteries. How could it just fall off the face of the earth?
Since her disappearance, Titanic became the holy grail for deep-sea explorers who set out on a race to find her.
Fantastic! All right!
None of us really on the ship had any idea of how interested the world would be that we had found Titanic.
But now the latest expeditions reveal Titanic faces a grave new threat.
The roof of the deck house was intact, but in 2004 and in 2010, these areas are just dissolving away.
For the very first time, 3D animation of the evolution of the wreck predicts how long it will take to disintegrate.
The degradation of Titanic will probably never stop.
Will the legendary ship disappear forever?
Over time, decay will be inevitable.
We have to recover artifacts. If we are not doing that, everything will be lost.
The legendary Titanic has fascinated historians, scientists, and the public for decades. Since her discovery in 1985, the Titanic wreck has been analyzed by experts to determine the cause of its sinking. While every expedition gets closer to revealing more clues about the infamous ship, one major discovery is concerning experts. The wreck is being engulfed by bacteria that consumes up to 650 pounds of iron a day, imposing a serious risk to the site.
During the sinking, an initial impact will have twisted and turned metal, and those twistings and turnings have actually opened cracks in the steel that have now made it much more available to biodeterioration. Naturally forming bacteria in the environment attach and start degrading the wreck.
Over time, decay will be inevitable, and that collapse will trap objects inside the ship that could be of some kind of historical value.
World-renowned Titanic experts are returning to the wreck site for the ultimate expedition. Their mission is critical. Dive 12,000 feet and help scientists determine how much longer before the superstructure disappears forever. Financed by American deep-sea explorer and submarine pilot Victor Vescovo, this expedition will determine the current state of the wreck. And for the first time ever, 3D animated footage reveals Titanic's evolution from when she first set sail to its time underwater after sinking on April 15, 1912, until today. Battered by fluctuating currents and salt water, these animations show the wreck's different stages of rapid decomposition in the extreme environment on the ocean floor, a major concern for the world's leading Titanic explorers. We bring together these pioneering oceanographers of our time to not only relive their captivating journeys of discovery, but shed new light on the danger that the wreck is now facing. One such expert is Jean-Louis Michel, a pioneer in underwater research who co-directed the French-American scientific teams of the Discovery mission to localize and find Titanic in 1985.
Autour de moi, alors c'était la tempête, quoi. L'effervescence même. Tout le bateau est passé pour voir les images de la découverte. On est sur le Titanic.
And Paul-Henri Nargeolet, a former French Navy diver who has led 7 expeditions to the wreck. He is considered the savior of Titanic's relics.
We found some little box with jewelry. It was a big emotion because, you know, it's like if you are opening a treasure box.
And Patrick Leahy, technological innovator, submarine builder, and the last man to see the wreck in person.
It was a dream to one day dive the Titanic. Obviously, it's a very alluring wreck. You know, it's one that we've heard about for decades, if not more. You know, tremendous human tragedy. So I definitely wanted to see it, and I figured one day I would.
And James Cameron, an explorer, as well as an innovator in underwater marine and movie technology.
There was this powerful, almost magnetic attraction to find out what's down there. That great mystery of what's down there in the darkness.
Back in 1997, with the global success of his blockbuster feature film, Titanic, James Cameron delivered the history of the legendary tragedy into the public's interest as never before. Although renowned as a filmmaker, Cameron is also a recognized deep-sea explorer with historic accomplishments to his credit. For him, Titanic was the perfect entry into his passions.
Titanic is enormous. That's why they call it Titanic. Well, I think what happens is that Titanic sort of is like a black hole. It sucks you in. I'd studied the history of it a great deal. I'd become a member of the Titanic community, many of whom are interested in the events of the sinking and so on. And I think Titanic was one of those great mysteries. How could it just fall off the face of the earth?
To understand the impact of the ocean liner's disappearance, we must return to her origins when Titanic was already a world wonder. The construction of the Titanic began in 1909 in Belfast, Ireland, and took over 3 years to complete. Measuring 882 feet long and 175 feet high to the top of the smokestacks, Titanic weighed in at 46,000 tons and cost $7.5 million, or the equivalent of over $200 million today. She was widely thought to be unsinkable.
The Titanic represented in 1912 as the top of the top, and it was the best ship ever built and the biggest one ever built. The top of technology, the top of the luxury, everything.
With a capacity of 2,435 passengers and 892 crew, the ship attracted voyagers from all economic backgrounds.
The passenger on board the Titanic was high society. The rich people, they were very well known. They were the star at this time. There was no movie star or stuff like that. It was the rich people, they were the star. And also the immigrant, they want to come to US to have a better life, a new life.
The lower classes were relegated to the lower decks, away from the freewheeling first-class passengers. But for the aristocratic adventurer, the Titanic was designed to entertain and delight at every moment. With luxurious decks and quarters, a heated swimming pool, a gym, cigar lounges, a photography room, posh dining areas, and even Turkish baths. Everything had been thought of, and no comfort spared. For the wealthy, the 7 days spent sailing to reach the shores of New York City would be a chance to live the dream. But soon that dream would turn into a nightmare.
The Titanic tragedy took place because in 1912, the winter was very warm and a lot of icebergs were there, and that's why it was possible for the Titanic, who was running by far too fast, to hit one of the icebergs.
Somewhere off the coast of Newfoundland, April 14th, 1912, 11:40 p.m. 4 days after setting sail, Titanic, the largest ship in the ocean, hits an iceberg on its starboard side. It takes less than 60 seconds to seal Titanic's fate and doom the thousands of lives on board. Alerted by the crew, Captain Edward Smith orders the engines stopped. An hour later, the ship's prow has already sank 32 feet under the surface, It's chaos on the ship's deck. Alone in the telegraph room, the Marconi operator sends one last SOS message. Position 41 degrees 46 minutes north, 50 degrees 14 minutes west. SOS, sinking ship. On April 15th at 2:20 a.m., the RMS Titanic's lights flicker for the last time before she sinks into the freezing ocean. In under 3 hours, the Titanic vanished from the surface of the sea. Of the 2,240 passengers and crew, over 1,500 people, a majority third-class passengers and crew, perished, reaching their final destination along with the ocean liner at the bottom of the sea. On land, news of the disaster travels around the world. The ocean liner Carpathia rescues just 700 passengers and crew from where Titanic sank. But hope for more survivors quickly fades, and the ship disappears without a trace. 4 days after the disaster, a press release from Halifax dashes the last hopes. According to experts, the wreck lies between Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, a massive area. The article adds that the wreck is estimated to rest at 12,000 feet under the sea.
Initially, in the first few months after the sinking, people wanted to go out there. But when they found out that it hadn't fallen on the Grand Banks in a few hundred feet of water, that it had fallen in 12,000 feet of water, and no amount of money in the world at that time could get you that deep. So it became this very mysterious, enigmatic thing that had gone into another world where it was unreachable.
At the time, no one on Earth knew where the Titanic could be found. Was she truly lost forever? Only the advancement of technology could solve this mystery. In an excruciating 2 hours and 40 minutes, Titanic, the crown jewel of ocean liners, sinks in the North Atlantic, taking over 1,500 lives down with her. For decades, the mystery of the wreck's location becomes an obsession for historians and ocean explorers. But until technology advances, the race to find Titanic is dead in the water. The colossal scale of the disaster and the fact that the wreck could not be reached meant the Titanic quickly became the stuff of legends, a legend that continues even today.
This is not an exaggeration to say that I actually made the film because I wanted to go and dive to the Titanic wreck. And then I had to make this movie. Okay, all right, I'll make the movie. And then that worked out well. And so then I could afford to go some more. So why not?
Well before James Cameron, filmmakers and explorers had always been intrigued by underwater filming, but were limited by the technology of their day. Interestingly enough, the evolution of underwater technology begins around the same time as the sinking of the Titanic.
It was the beginning of the movie, and of course you have people, they were thinking, why we don't do that underwater? They were trying to build some boxes to put their camera inside. And you know, even today, you have to be very careful when you're doing that, and they have a lot of trouble.
Of the many attempts, some failed and some successful. One particular experiment was perhaps the trailblazer of underwater photography. The Williamson brothers, who wanted to invent a method of capturing underwater images, adapted a naval telescopic system originally meant to recover sunken vessels.
Ernest Williamson découvre ce système, il dit c'est génial et l'adapte en fait avec au bout du tube télescopique une sphère qu'il appelle la photosphère, qu'il a surnommée Jules Verne. Il va pouvoir filmer sous la mer avec des éclairages qui venaient de la surface, alors bien sûr à des petites profondeurs. C'était génial de pouvoir filmer sous l'eau et de pouvoir montrer ça au public.
Nobody knows anything about underwater. And of course, these people, they were saying, we want to show that to the public. And that's why they created all this equipment.
In 1916, only 4 years after Titanic's tragedy, the telescopic contraption is used with an underwater camera by the Williamson brothers on the set of their feature film, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. The operator does not descend below 65 feet underwater, but film audiences are blown away as nothing comparable to date had ever been witnessed. This major technological breakthrough catches the attention of a journalist who offers a rare, hopeful insight since Titanic's disappearance. It is unlikely, but by no means impossible, that children of those who went down in the Titanic may live to look upon an actual picture of that great steamship resting on the ocean's floor. The 1920s were a furious decade of innovations in transport and mobility. Only a few years after the release of the Williamson brothers' film, a thirst for technology sparked a race to invent the next vehicle that could take man ever deeper underwater. That technological evolution can be found here in Cherbourg, in the Great Gallery of the Cité de la Mer, where a full collection from as far back as the 1920s of man-made submersibles is on display. Including some of the very first vehicles that made it possible to descend into the abyss, the bathyspheres, invented by the American engineers William Beebe and Otis Barton in 1928.
When William Beebe built this sphere, of course he wanted to test it first with nobody inside. And when the sphere come back to the deck and they start to open it, it was full of water with pressure, and they were like a big, a big storm of water coming on the deck. But they fixed the problem, and after they go inside and they went down deep. And it was really the beginning of deep diving.
On August 15, 1934, a new world record is set when Beebe and Barton descend in their cast-iron bathysphere to 3,044 feet below the ocean surface. Measuring 1.5 feet thick, the sphere's walls were effective at countering the 1,334 pounds of pressure, more than enough to flatten a human being. Ever since the success of Beebe and Barton, the sphere has set the standard for underwater vehicles, paving the way for many giant leaps in technology. But in the 1960s, the sphere alone wasn't enough to protect against the high pressure exerted below 3,000 feet. For a solution, engineers zero in on titanium, a super strong and lightweight material that would allow deep-sea vehicles to reach the Titanic at a depth of 4 times more. It is with this material that today's most inventive submarine builders continue to push technology forward to penetrate the ocean's deepest regions. Here in Florida, one of the world's most innovative engineers is responsible for taking submersible technology to the next level.
We made 5 dives to Titanic, and I had the privilege of making 3 of those dives. Being able to physically see something with your own eyes, experience it in real time, it's emotional, it's powerful, and it's memorable. The first sub that we built that was capable of reaching Titanic was the limiting factor.
A submersible built for extreme depths. The limiting factor is a high-tech titanium sphere that protects the operators from the crushing pressure at a maximum of 58,000 feet, weighing in at 11 tons per square inch.
The reason that we use a sphere is because a sphere allows for the even distribution of forces on the craft. So the pressure boundary of the limiting factor is 1,500 millimeters in inside diameter, 90 millimeters thick. It is a perfect sphere. There is no welding on the hull. It's all bolted and clamped together. All of that is in an effort to ensure that there are no differences in the material characteristics of the hull at any point.
Back at Triton Submersibles, fellow oceanographer and director of underwater research at RMS Titanic Inc., Paul Henry Nargeolet, is a frequent visitor and close friend of Leahy's.
Okay, PH, welcome. Good to see you back.
He travels the world in search of the latest innovations for his future expeditions to Titanic.
The limiting factor is 12 ton, 11, 12 ton, which is very light, for going much deeper. And the good thing with LF, you can launch the LF from the ship, recover at night, and back and forth, and you can dive almost every day in very deep water. That's a big, a big progress in the technology.
With titanium to protect against pressure, other innovations are still necessary to ensure buoyancy or how well an object floats, like syntactic foam.
The reason we use it is it creates displacement. It consists of glass microspheres, so tiny little glass spheres in an epoxy matrix, which is quite heavy, but if you put it in the water, it floats. We're lucky that we can produce this remarkable material, which can go to full ocean depth, and we can use it repeatedly, and we don't have to replenish it or anything like that.
Syntactic foam placed in the upper part of the submersible ensures the vehicle's ability to return to the surface. When the pilot wishes to go up, he lightens the submarine by dropping ballast. The combination of syntactic foam and the titanium sphere rings in a new era in underwater exploration. Out are the heavy, unwieldy bathyscaphe, and in come the swift, manageable pocket submarines capable of exploring the abyss and their legendary shipwrecks. Naturally, Titanic is at the top of the list. With major innovations in deep-sea diving, the race to find the infamous and elusive Titanic wreck site quickens in pace, with many explorers and enthusiasts leading the charge. And back in 1970, Texan oil magnate Jack Grimm, a private citizen, looks to make headlines with a pop culture discovery. Having already hunted for the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot, Grimm spends $3 million in an attempt to find the wreck.
The first thing we did, we went to where they gave us their SOS position and found nothing there.
Grimm calculated that the position sent out by Titanic as she sank was incorrect due to the difference in time zones between Europe and North America.
When the SOS warning was sent out on the orders of Captain Smith, the navigator came up with a location some 10 miles farther west than where he thought he was.
Even though Grimm had worked out why the original coordinates of the wreck's location was incorrect, after several attempts, he still comes back empty-handed, joining a long list of those who dreamed of bringing the wreck up by any means. Even the most improbable, such as raising it with powerful magnets. As technology continues to advance, the real race to find Titanic begins. By two underwater technology powerhouses, the US and France. By the 1980s, the two countries work regularly together as they possess the most advanced underwater technology in the world. They jointly launch an expedition named White Star after the White Star Line Company. Its mission: find Titanic. This first international campaign, a cooperation between the Ifremer Institute and the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, is co-directed by the American Robert Ballard and the Frenchman Jean-Louis Michel. At the time, the French oceanographer is developing a state-of-the-art sonar called SAR.
Nous estimions qu'il fallait 30 à 40 jours pour trouver le Titanic. Mettre des moyens comme ça, c'est énorme. Personne n'avait décidé d'investir dans des recherches aussi massives pour trouver le Titanic.
Jean-Louis Michel intends to use his sonar device to locate the wreck. Attached to a boat on the surface, the SAR robot can explore up to a depth of 20,000 feet. Information collected by reflected sound waves can then identify materials on the seafloor.
Si le son qui revient émane d'un fond sédimentaire, la signature est différente que si le son émane d'un navire. Parce que le son métallique est plus fort et différent du son du sédiment. Enfin, on connaît bien les fonds une fois qu'on est passé avec cet engin.
The American team uses a different technology called the Argo, which works with an optical scan. With a frame made of steel tubes weighing about 4,000 pounds, the undersea sled has an array of sophisticated video cameras and lighting.
The Argo camera system was sort of revolutionary in terms of the oceanographic survey world. It was one of the first times that scientists would have a live image from a towed camera system on the seafloor.
The Americans and the French hope to uncover debris from the Titanic by scanning as much of the seabed as possible. But before sailing off, they must define a search area. For 3 years, Jean-Louis Michel and his team gather survivors' accounts, pore over reports by investigative commissions, and check the logbooks of nearby ships, looking for errors in the ship's position to carry out an efficient and scientific investigation.
Alors, on a pris les bateaux qui étaient directement concernés. Le Californian, il voit le Titanic à une certaine distance, avec un certain angle. Ça me donne un complément d'information, mais sans plus.
Jean-Louis Michel estimates that the speed of the Titanic is between 21 and 22.5 knots. The location and speed of the rescue ship Carpathia is also recorded. By using this information in coordination with Titanic's route, the explorers hope to get closer to locating the whereabouts of the wreck site.
Là, sur le livre de bord, ils ont reçu le message du Titanic, ils déroutent. Ils se déroutent de leur trajectoire normale. Donc, le Carpathia est arrivé, et 2 heures après le naufrage, ils chopent les chaloupes. Et on arrive à une zone, on n'arrive pas à un point.
The search area is narrowed to a 12 by 12 nautical mile zone, measuring approximately 200 square miles. Still, Jean-Louis Michel's calculations are an estimation. Would it be enough? In 1985, American and French search teams would find out as they set sail in a multi-million-dollar gamble to find the location of the Titanic. Would they find the mythical wreck? And if so, who would find her first? By the year 1985, a new set of explorers are closer to finding Titanic than any other search team in history. With the latest in oceanographic technology and new search coordinates, the race between the Americans and the French to find the Titanic begins. The French are the first to sail aboard the ship Le Suroît. For 32 days straight, the crew takes turns around the clock to scan the ocean floor. On August 7, Le Suroît and its towed robot have scoured over 80% of the defined area, 250 square miles. But SAR provides disappointing information. There is no shipwreck. Could they be looking in the wrong place? The American team, headed by Robert Ballard, arrives on site on August 25th, taking up the search to comb through the remaining 20%, a 30 square nautical mile zone. Aboard the Noor, Jean-Louis Michel joins the American engineers and technicians, including Bill Lang.
Bob Ballard had an idea that we didn't need to look for the hull of the ship, but a ship as big as Titanic should have a lot of debris associated with it on the seafloor. That debris, in conjunction with the hull of the ship, is a much bigger target. The hull of a ship is maybe 900 feet long. The debris trail could be a mile long. That's 5,280 feet. So it's a lot bigger target to go and look for small debris. And that's why we use the Argo to go and look for that debris trail. And for days upon days, we got nothing but mud. People would get excited if we saw a fish or a rock.
On scrutait des images du sédiment à n'en plus finir. Le sédiment, c'est la morne plaine. Okay? C'est la Lune.
At midnight on September 1st, I was on the watch from 12 midnight to 4 a.m. About 45 minutes to an hour into that watch, we started seeing some objects on the seafloor and knew that they were man-made.
Moi, en français, je dis « ça mord ». Ça mord, ça bouge, il y a quelque chose qui change.
The team watches anxiously for potential evidence of the elusive Titanic wreck site. And finally, the wait is over.
As we went on, all of a sudden, a boiler came into the field of view, and Jean-Louis Michel screamed, "Boiler!"
Ooh. Fantastic! All right!
Boiler! Oh, yes, yes. We're gonna feel this too. Oh, yes, I'm sure it's a boiler. I see. Yes. We got it.
La chaudière, alors là, il n'y en a qu'une. Hein. Des chaudières avec des rivets, façon Tour Eiffel, bon. et les foyers. En l'espace de quelques minutes, on est passé de la morne plaine à l'identification. On est sur le Titanic.
Titanic, the infamous ship that sank to the ocean depths 73 years ago, has been found. And although the French came very close to discovering it first, it's the American team who finally solves this mystery.
To be honest with you, none of us really on the ship had any idea of how interested the world would be that we had found Titanic.
Moi, le premier truc qui est venu à l'esprit, j'ai dit « Ah, mes pauvres gars, ils auraient dû être là ». Quand je dis mes gars, c'est les gars qui étaient sur le bateau français qui n'ont pas connu cette joie. Ils ont connu la déception, mais ils n'ont pas connu la joie de la découverte. Et ils méritaient de la partager.
73 years after her sinking, the wreck's stunning discovery confirms the accounts of some survivors. The liner did indeed break in two. The stern and the bow are a massive 2,000 feet apart, an area much too large for the Americans to explore in its entirety. Now the wreck has finally been discovered, plans are put in place to return to the site for a closer look. (1986), only 11 months after the wreck's discovery, oceanographer Robert Ballard, aboard the submarine Alvin, returns to the ruins of the giant ocean liner. This second expedition to the Titanic site offers the opportunity to test new robot, Jason Jr. This is the first time a manned submersible had deployed a robot at this depth. Jason Jr. could also roam around the wreck, filming in color, and the images collected are stunning.
I was actually in my first week or so of filming Aliens in England, and I wasn't paying attention to the news at all. I think I probably heard it in the background somewhere that they had found the Titanic wreck. And then I think when I got back and I was finished with Aliens, I was just watching TV, I think even with the sound down, and I saw a picture of the Jason Jr. ROV. I don't even think I bothered to turn the sound up because I knew what it was. I could understand exactly what it was just by looking at it. And so, you know, I was just fascinated by it.
During the first dive with Alvin, Alvin came up upon the steel wall, and Bob describes this as this just dark steel barrier that saw no end. So it really wasn't until later that we started seeing from the video from Alvin those things and hanging down everywhere, and we had no idea what they were. Nobody had really seen those before.
These structures that cling to the hull, resembling rusty icicles, are aptly named rusticles by Robert Ballard.
It just looks like the ship has been dripped in wax. Just brown wax has been poured over.
These rusticles are seen on the hull's surface. But were they actually mere rust or something else? And could this new unidentified material be a threat to Titanic? After 73 years, Titanic, the famed ocean liner that sank in the Atlantic, taking with it over 1,500 lives, has been found. A joint expedition led by teams from the US and France achieved what no one has done before. And as explorers and the world celebrated the power of this historic moment, the true scale of the devastation would soon be revealed. Less than a year after discovering the Titanic wreck, American explorer Robert Ballard returns for a deeper exploration of the legendary ship's wreck site. As he glides over the field of debris around the wreck, he discovers a multitude of small objects and personal belongings scattered over the ocean floor, bringing home the magnitude of lives lost.
And all that's left of human signature are their shoes. And all around the Titanic are pairs of shoes. Mother's shoes next to daughter's shoes, men's shoes, crew members. These are the tombstones. Now, I wasn't expecting to be hit by it. See, I went in there, you know, totally under control, so to speak, and I was blown away. It was a very moving experience that I did not expect to have.
A vast field of objects stretches out before Robert Ballard's eyes. Hundreds of thousands of items are spread over less than a mile between the ship's prow and stern. The jumble of passengers' personal belongings, mixed with giant pieces of machinery, bear witness to the violence and tragedy of the wreck. A portion of the debris field is nicknamed Hell's Kitchen due to the many cooking utensils strewn about. Sections of the hull lie all around the site. Deeply moved by this apocalyptic sight, Robert Ballard vows to preserve the wreck as a shrine to the lives lost. But despite intense campaigning by Robert Ballard against bringing up artifacts from the Titanic, 2 years after its discovery, a French-American team sails off on a 2-month expedition. Its goal, to salvage objects from the seafloor and enable the world to learn even more about the Titanic and its passengers. To carry out this deep-sea archaeological excavation, in 1987, the French Nautile is chosen over the American Alvin. As the Alvin belongs to the US military, so is not able to be used for private expeditions. Today, the famous yellow submarine is still in operation and remains at the cutting edge of technology. To date, Nautile has made a record 119 dives to the Titanic. 9 of these were piloted by Jean-Paul Justiniano.
Le pilote est en position de travail, il est positionné sur le ventre et il peut, à pleine main, récupérer sa poignée de bras et pouvoir faire tous les mouvements indispensables pour la maîtrise des bras extérieurs.
In order to bring artifacts to the surface, the submarine is equipped with various tools, including gripper arms, a genuine Swiss Army knife of the deep. The Nautile is capable of operating at 20,000 feet under the sea. The movement of the arms are basic. It can be raised, lowered, and angled using the various joysticks inside the sub.
Sur Titanic, des fois on descend dans des endroits assez exigus et il y a le courant, il y a tout qui bouge. Donc il faut gérer les moteurs en même temps, le bras. C'est assez, des fois c'est pas simple.
Like a rocket ready to break away from Earth's gravity, the submarine is hoisted out over the open sea. The winch lets out several feet of cable, and the Nautile plunges into the Big Blue. The exterior of the Nautile is inspected in the water. At this point, any error could lead to a deadly chain of events. Inside the sphere, the final checks, all ready. Cramped in a mere 140 cubic feet, the 3 crew members make their descent in total darkness to save on battery power.
C'est 2000 mètres ou c'est 4000 mètres ou c'est 6000 mètres qu'il y a au-dessus et la taille du sous-marin qui fait une douzaine de mètres de longueur, enfin qui est petit quoi. Et on se dit mais on est minuscule là-dedans, donc c'est assez impressionnant. Ouais.
The Nautile takes 1 hour and 15 minutes to reach the Titanic at 12,000 feet below sea level, at a high speed close to 3 feet per second. Reaching the ocean floor, the submarine slows and turns on its powerful searchlights. Over the course of 32 dives, over 1,800 items were brought back up with Nautile's basket or with elevators capable of hauling heavy loads. The first expedition ever to recover objects at this depth is an achievement. In the middle of the debris field, the expedition comes across a curiously tidy arrangement of ceramic plates. Items like these pose a dilemma for the team.
Si on veut les remonter, avec nos petits bras musclés qui exercent une pression de 100 kg au centimètre carré en bout de pince, c'était clair qu'on allait tout casser. Donc on a développé une genre d'outil préhension sous forme de ventouse.
One by one, the fragile plates are gently captured by suction and brought to the basket. In total, Ifremer collected over 5,800 items as a contractor for the American company RMS Titanic Inc., the only entity authorized to bring up artifacts from the wreck. The decision is to retrieve relics only on the outside of the Titanic. But for Robert Ballard and some survivors of the wreck, this is sacrilege. Recovering precious relics without damaging them is one thing, but will exposure to the air after a century underwater destroy them? The legendary Titanic has captured the hearts and minds of the public and explorers alike for over a century. But it wasn't until 1985 that the infamous shipwreck was finally found. Since then, expeditions have gone back to the Titanic to salvage the precious artifacts from the seafloor. Las Vegas, the world's largest exhibition dedicated to the Titanic, brings together all of the artifacts recovered by Paul Henry Nargeolet's team. In the early 1990s, the battle intensified between those who wanted to rescue Titanic's artifacts and share her history, and those who didn't want the site interfered with.
It's crazy to think that it's better to do nothing than to recover artifacts. And I think when we say is a conservation in situ, for me, it's a deterioration in situ. And I think if we want to save something on the Titanic, we have to recover artifacts, we have to recover even pieces of the ship and preserve them on surface, and we can save them for the next future generation. If we are not doing that, everything will be lost.
For one of Titanic's key explorers, each precious artifact should be considered in its own right.
The key that sent the SOS, to me, that's a historical object. And I like the idea of having things that persist through time, that are carefully curated, that 500 years from now, people can still look at that key and remember that story of those two young guys that typed that SOS. So they became heroes of the story.
Before being exhibited in museums around the world, delicate relics must be treated and cleaned by restoration professionals to bring the items as close to their original states as possible.
You know what it is? It's a lamp.
Each material requires its own process. The wrong treatment could cause a reaction with the material that would destroy or damage it further.
So artifacts who are more resistant are in glass, the dish, the bowl, and in ceramic or this kind of materials, they resist very well. Of course, everything in metal disappeared before, or in leather, in paper, all these kind of artifacts, step by step, they disappear.
Personal effects made of organic materials such as leather or paper required a special restoration process. Corrosion of the ship's metal parts created a black ink-like film covering the items. But their original surfaces were revealed after careful chemical cleaning. In the open air, artifacts deteriorate rapidly. The oxidation process must be stopped and the utmost done to ensure long-term conservation. For years, professionals, both jewelers and engineers, worked to treat all of the Titanic artifacts, whatever their size or nature. The items are immersed in chemical baths adapted for their composition. For metallic pieces, electricity comes to the rescue. Items are placed in a tub through which flows direct electric current. Tiny hydrogen bubbles then form, which lift off dirt. No other process could achieve this without damaging the item. Back in 1996, RMS Titanic Inc. aimed to go even further by hauling back bigger, heavier, and more imposing pieces to the surface. But the endeavor could pose serious risks, as the most experienced of Titanic explorers were well aware.
When we're diving, we know that the second that we're free of that ship and we're in the water, we're tiny and the ocean is great. When you dive down to a place like Titanic, you're in a region of zero light, extremely high pressure that can destroy even really strong components of titanium or steel. You don't take chances, you move methodically, you plan very carefully. You know, currents can swirl you around. Everything is more difficult underwater. If something is difficult on land, it'll be impossible underwater. If it's easy on land, it'll be very difficult underwater.
Over the course of the dive, while passing over the debris field, Paul Henry Nargeolet discovers an imposing piece of the Titanic's hull. Photographed, filmed, and measured, this monumental section of the ship is named the Big Piece.
It's a very, very nice piece, and it's a nice part of the Titanic. And in plus, we can see exactly how the ship was built, and it's very interesting technical aspect.
Never before had something so large on the site been brought to the surface. Using cables, the team attempts to raise the estimated 20-ton piece on a multi-million-dollar recovery mission. But the weather doesn't cooperate. Conditions and multiple technical issues cause equipment breakdowns. Cables snap, and the attempt ends in total failure.
I was saying something bad will happen, the big piece will be broken.
Had the team met their match, would this precious piece never again see the light of day? And what does the future hold for the rest of the ship that remains on the ocean floor? Since the lost Titanic wreck was discovered in 1985, explorers have been returning to the site in an ongoing effort to save and preserve the ship's many artifacts. In 1994, expedition leader Paul Henry Nargeolet discovered an enormous piece of Titanic's hull lying on the ocean floor. Measuring 26 by 12 feet and weighing in at 20 tons, the team's historic multi-million-dollar effort to raise the big piece ended in failure. But Nargeolet wasn't ready to give up. 2 years later, he was back on a new expedition to try again.
We don't have a big crane or big ship for doing that, and we were using what we call lift bag, full with the diesel fuel of the ship. Each bag has a capacity of 20 tons of fuel, and each bag would give us, at the depth of the Titanic, 3 tons of buoyancy.
Nothing like this had ever been achieved by any archaeologist before, but this time, the team is hopeful for a win. One by one, the fuel bags filled with diesel are reattached.
Step by step, we were releasing this bag. That is good with this system. We have the choice to decide when we will release the last weight and let the big piece come up by buoyancy.
The IFREMER team would need 6 days to attach fuel balloons to the big piece. After 20 minutes of ascent, the piece of hull once destined to live forever under the sea reappears in the light. Like all the other artifacts, the big piece was treated and restored. For 2 years, the hull was kept in a pool of electrified water and chemical treatment. The 26 by 23 foot remnant originates from the starboard side of Titanic. Today, this centerpiece of the Las Vegas Museum is the biggest draw.
It's unbelievable the number of rivets on this piece. Yeah, there is 120 just here, 500, easy 500 rivets.
Today, it is no less than a miracle to see a piece of the Titanic preserved so well. But other parts of the ship, still underwater, may not be as fortunate. Since 1985, when the discovery of Titanic revealed the rust-like formations covering her entire hull, explorers wondered what these formations were and what damage they were doing. Titanic has a new mystery to solve. In a laboratory in Canada, microbiologist Laurie Johnston is among the world's leading experts on Titanic's bacteria for the last 20 years. Her analysis of the strange orange-colored material has revealed a surprising result. The rusticles are alive.
There's more life on Titanic now than there was when she was at the surface. It's just not human life, it's biological and organic life.
In her laboratory, Laurie Johnston studies precious samples of the rusticles taken from the wreck.
So you can see the stratification within the rusticle itself, and it's almost like tree rings as it builds up over time. This here, you could see the glinting black are tiny pieces of coal within there. So during the sinking, the coal that had come out from the boilers had been in the water column. So coal dust must have landed on here and it's been incorporated into the rusticle itself.
In the early 20th century, no scientist imagined that any form of life was possible down in the abyss. But in her sinking, the Titanic brought millions of bacteria down from above. A find as surprising as if life had suddenly been discovered on the lunar surface.
These rusticles are colonies of bacteria. They have their own, they create circulation inside, they have gravity-fed flow, they feed nutrients from where they're dissolving the ship down to the rest of the colony, and they grow down until sometimes they get 2 meters long.
The rusticles have been known to cause deterioration up to 100 kilograms per day of iron that it's removing from the ship itself. And this wreck itself, Titanic, because it's made of steel, is a very good food source at the bottom of the ocean.
For decades, rusticles have grafted onto the hull. Between Titanic's sinking in 1912 and her discovery in 1985, a few hundred tons would have formed on the bow of the wreck. 3D modeling is used to show a time-lapse animation of the decomposition by bacteria of all parts of the Titanic. No areas of the wreck remain untouched by the bacteria, including the most iconic sections, like Captain Smith's cabin.
Captain bathroom, you know, we saw in 35 years a lot of difference because at the beginning, you know, the wall of the bathroom was just a little bit far away from the roof. And step by step, this part collapsed completely. And we can see inside the bathroom. And now the roof collapsed too, and the tub was like almost intact at the beginning. Now it's full of debris from the wall and from the roof, and we can see just the edge of the bathtub, you know. That's an evidence that the deterioration is going forward close to the bridge, step by step.
The decomposition is a threat to Titanic's existence. For James Cameron, this is a new race against time to explore the wreck before it's too late. Titanic continues to intrigue deep-sea explorers like James Cameron, whose never-ending curiosity began long before his expeditions to the legendary wreck.
That particular picture was taken when I was 14 years old. I was fascinated by underwater things, and I had seen an underwater habitat at the Royal Ontario Museum. And I did sketches of it and so on, and I got very excited. I decided to build my own. And I put my pet mouse in that, and I lowered it on a rope down to the bottom of a nearby river. So it went down about 20 feet, and the mouse was fine. He survived.
44 years later, James Cameron is the first man in history to make a solo dive into the Mariana Trench, the world's deepest place on Earth at 35,787 feet below sea level. His objective has always been to explore the abyss. An undisputed expert, his passion is inseparably linked to his quest for the technology and engineering needed to bring him closer to the Titanic.
I was fascinated by the idea of the very deep ocean. I loved everything about the ocean. And I wanted to see ROVs, I wanted to see robotics, I wanted to see submersibles.
In 1991, a new expedition to dive down to the wreck on the Russian Mir submersible is organized to capture rare images for a unique purpose, an IMAX movie aimed at the general audience.
I said, if they can do it on an IMAX budget, which is a couple $1 million, I can do it for a theatrical feature budget that might be 10 or 20 times that. And I thought, I'm going to Titanic.
Seeing a unique opportunity, James Cameron decides to contact the person in charge of this expedition. This person is no other than the legendary Russian oceanographer, Anatoly Sagaleevich, a man who shares the same passion for Titanic as the filmmaker.
I remember the first dive on Titanic. All the time, my heart was just, jump,
Despite 10 years passing since they last met, Anatoly Sagaleevich and James Cameron have remained close friends. Their numerous missions together have bonded them like no other oceanographers.
I wish there were more scientists like you, Tolia. I wish everybody in the world could understand that to be a scientist and an engineer and an explorer doesn't mean that you live only in your head. Anatoly also lives strongly in his emotions, and to me, he's the ultimate human being. It balances the mind and the heart.
Back in 1991, Russian crews used the Mir submersibles for the IMAX expedition to Titanic. These technologically advanced subs that were designed by Sagaleevich himself gave James Cameron an idea.
Why I chose to work with the Mirs? There are two. There are two subs. So the number of characters that you have in the story is the number of vehicles that you have minus one. You have one vehicle, you have no character, right? You have two subs. Sure, you can do images, and you can have the other sub stay out of frame and just light things up. The second that sub enters frame, now you're telling a story. And that's different, and we were there to tell a story.
Mir 1 just shoot it, and Mir 2 made some lighting or just made some kind of entertainment like an actor.
We'd come up here, and the lights would hit the ship. You wouldn't see very much. You'd just see this line right there. And then you come up and stop, and then you wait for the other sub, and the other sub comes down behind you. It's maybe 20 minutes later. So we sit and have a little tea, and then the other sub arrives, and then we begin our operation, usually by flying up over the ship and following along the ship. It's Titanic, dude. Check it out, huh?
For his film project, James Cameron aims to capture the Titanic with state-of-the-art underwater cinematography and lighting,
Titanic is a very, very challenging photographic subject. When you go into the deep ocean, there's absolutely no ambient light there. The visibility of the water might only be, let's call it 150 feet, maybe 200 feet at the most, and the whole bow section is about twice that long. You never even see the whole thing all at once. And you have to just bombard it with light because it's reddish orange. It's the color of rust. And the red color doesn't travel through water very far. So it's like the wreck just sucks your light. So you have to dump enormous amounts of light on it. So we put more lights on these poor mirror submersibles than they'd ever had on them before. We were bolting lights on, and I kept saying, let's add one more, let's add one more. And it's always like, oh my God. But we went down there and we lit the place up.
It took James Cameron and Anatoly Sagaleyevich 12 dives to scout and complete the shoot. But the footage they captured was unlike anything the world has ever seen.
So they'd count portholes, and they'd say, okay, we think we're at D35 right now. I'd say, shine your light in. Meanwhile, I'm inside the ship with the ROV, and I'd see a light come in, and I'd say, oh, you're at the wrong window, go to the next window. And then once they got the right window, remember all this?
Yes.
All the underwater technology and lighting at Cameron's disposal was still not enough to capture the necessary details for his Hollywood blockbuster.
This one was used in the movie Titanic because the bigger shots that included 2 subs had to be done with models. We could only do shots with 1 sub, but there were supposed to be 2 subs in the story. So the bigger, wider shots were done using this model. So this model had to match perfectly the real ship, because we were mixing shots of the real ship with shots of a model. And I don't think the average person could tell the difference. But the answer is very simple. If you see 2 subs in the shot, it's a model shot. If you see 1 sub, it's a real thing.
Jim once asked me, Toля, what do you think? How many Oscars? I said him, 10 minimum. He said, no. I said, yeah, 10 minimum.
The movie eventually took home 11 Oscars. Although it cost $200 million to make, it grossed over $2 billion. The film helped spread the legendary story of the Titanic worldwide and across all generations. However, the Canadian filmmaker had no interest in stopping there. His film triumph is not the end of his personal Titanic adventure. On his next dive to Titanic, James Cameron wanted to capture images from places where no one had ever gone before, the inside. After legendary filmmaker James Cameron and Russian oceanographer Anatoly Sagaleyevich filmed the wreck for the blockbuster movie Titanic in 1997, they team up again for another 12,000-foot dive in 2005. This time, they will attempt to go even further. Back aboard the Mir, James Cameron pilots an innovative robot vehicle equipped with cameras to conduct an archaeological study inside of the wreck. He reveals and documents spaces in the Titanic that no one has ever seen before.
We used a very different methodology, which was the fiber optic that spools out. The vehicle doesn't have to worry about fouling, and it doesn't have to worry about coming back out the same way. I'm not sure if this is clear to people, but we would fly wherever we wanted inside the ship, upstairs, down elevator shafts, through rooms and so on, and leave behind thousands of feet of the fiber. And then the vehicle comes back to the sub, we cut the fiber, recover the vehicle, cut the fiber, and then we wind the fiber back, and it just kind of comes out through the ship like a piece of string and comes back to us, and then we dispose of it. We're just about to head down the stairwell now. We're gonna go down actually 6 decks, and we're gonna try to get into the Turkish baths, which we've never seen. Nobody's ever seen it. Oh my
God.
Copy that.
It's all here. It's like time has just stopped.
It has.
It's hard to imagine where we are, how deep we are, how remote we are from the human world. And yet, we find this beautiful place. When you're moving around inside the ship, you feel like you're either in a cave or you're in maybe an earthen tunnel where the roots of trees are coming down into the space you're in, but it feels very organic. And then all of a sudden, you'll see a cabinet with a mirror or some artifact of civilization surrealistically transported into this biological kind of grotto or cave-like environment. It's very, very surreal.
Back at the James Cameron studio, the model of Titanic has become a three-dimensional representation of the bow of the wreck, from her sinking to her state in 1997. It is now possible to observe the damage.
You can see this collapse back here was caused when it initially hit. Right in the first few seconds of the ship plunging, the water pressure blew the mast back and slammed it back into that position. And you can see where it's actually bent, just like you'd bend a Coke can, you know? It's just bent right there. But then the weight, the gravity, has slowly brought it down, and it finally just collapsed. And it was already down when I was out there in 2005, so that's 10 years after my first expedition. It was already down. I think it's quite the way down now, collapsed in pieces.
At the bottom of the ocean, like a trampled twig, the mast is unrecognizable. In 1912, the mast stood on the bow and carried a crow's nest. It is from there that the lookout caught sight of the iceberg. But now, attacked by corrosion, the mast has collapsed, and the crow's nest, which was previously visible, has broken apart, crumbling under the rusticles. And in 2010, a new expedition discovers an unknown bacteria. Researchers name it Halomonas titanici. Halomonas is a branch of the bacteria family resistant to extreme conditions. These iron-eating bacteria literally consume steel. In the media, Halomonas titanici is held responsible as the main cause of the wreck's decomposition.
One puny bacteria does not deteriorate the whole wreck. You need that group, you need that community, you need that consortia of bacteria and fungi, molds working together to be able to cause the deterioration and the rustical structures on these wrecks.
It is the fate of every shipwreck to eventually disappear, but Titanic's decomposition is unusually rapid. In total, the scientific community discovered 27 different strains of the bacteria, estimated to be consuming between 450 and 650 pounds of iron per day. Based on this data, some experts predict that the wreck will disappear in less than 20 years. The race is on to get back to Titanic, this time for an urgent assessment of the ship's deterioration.
If you're going to manage something like this, a site this big, you need to know its confines, you need to know how big the site is.
The 2010 expedition mapped out the entire wreck site in an effort to gather data on her decomposition. Like archaeologists, the explorers make an inventory, the most complete that they can. The idea is to spot, identify, and measure all the elements on site. It is so far the largest ever scientific mission dedicated to documenting the wreck.
We wanted to make certain that there wasn't any objects or artifacts or anything from the wreck that was quite a ways from the other concentration of items at the wreck site. And we're not looking at an optical image. This isn't a camera. We're looking at what's called acoustic reflectivity. In the camera world, it would be sort of the shininess of an object. So here you can see a sonar image of the bow of the Titanic. This object up here is actually one of the hatch covers that blew off the ship as it was landing.
On one side, the stern, completely destroyed. On the other, the bow. And in between, the vast field of debris. For the first time, the site can be visualized in its entirety. But Lang's work was far from done. He prepares the biggest photo project ever undertaken. And this time, it's not about discovery, but about preservation.
We wanted to create an image of the wreck site as if you were walking on the seafloor and came up to this and there was no water there. That's a big undertaking.
During the 2010 expedition, hundreds of thousands of images are taken. Inch by inch, the wreck is photographed. It takes Bill Lang and his team over 2 years to assemble the pictures to create impressive photo mosaics. The results display remarkable accuracy. This crab clinging to the hull measures only 2 inches. Bill Lang has devoted his life to Titanic imaging. In earlier expeditions, he succeeded at capturing her bow. In 2010, by comparing his photos, it was possible to visualize the evolution of the wreck.
What's also very evident is that the roof of the deck house was intact in 1986, but in 2004 and in 2010, we're seeing all these holes open up. And this is where the metal roofs of these areas are just dissolving away.
At this stage, the entire wreck is in danger, at the mercy of an invisible enemy. Scientists are researching how a variety of processes, including bacteria, oxygen corrosion, and currents, are causing irreversible damage to this steel colossus. But 9 long years will pass before anyone returns to check in on the wreck. And with the current speed of decomposition, what of Titanic will be left to see?
Okay, Tom, last check. We're going to just have Tim, or maybe you can just secure your own hatch.
It is 2019. Patrick Leahy, Laurie Johnston, and Paul Henry Nargeolet set out on the first expedition to Titanic in 9 years.
Nose are down. You got 2 swimmers in the oil. You can start pumping down.
Roger that. Turning pumps on now.
Pump in?
Yep.
Their mission: determine the state of decomposition of the wreck.
We toured the wreck. You know, we got up very close to the shipwreck, and we went around it in detail, front and back, debris field, and everything else.
These are the very last images taken of the legendary Titanic wreck. For Patrick Leahy, as for all explorers of the wreck, every visit to this site is an overwhelming combination of amazement and emotion.
I was in awe of its physical size because, you see pictures of it, you've seen films about it, but when you drive up to it and you're physically looking at it and you see how enormous the wreck is, that was the first thing that struck me. It was impressive because it was the scene of such human suffering, a tremendous tragedy.
There's nothing there, obviously, and I don't believe in ghosts, but I do believe that human memory can overlay on reality, And I started to cry. In that moment, I made myself a promise that on every dive I make to Titanic, I take a moment to remember where I am and what happened here, and to be connected to it.
The 2019 images enable us to observe that the front of the bow has evolved very little since the last expedition in 2010. Those present at the dive report that the amount of rusticles has not increased. Deterioration continues, but has not accelerated. The experts agree unanimously the wreck will not disappear in the coming decades. Still, there are areas of the Titanic that remain at great risk, like the rear of the bow. The decomposition here is a warning of how the future of the wreck could progress.
What you can see here, this is the outer hull on the starboard side, and this is the outer hull on the port side. And this is called shell plating, and this is pulled away from the internal structure of the ship. So the internal framework, the decks and bulkheads were attached to the shell plating, but because of the impact of the bow section hitting the seafloor, the shell plating is pulled away from the internal structure.
For the first time, exceptional 3D animated footage provides an insight into future phases of ongoing decomposition of the Titanic. A future where the two parts of the hull break open like a book, where the stacked decks cave in and eventually collapse like a house of cards. But how long will it take for Titanic to transform from wreck into sediment?
The degradation of Titanic will probably never stop.
The Titanic, it's an unbelievable story. And I say for sure, in almost 500 years, we will still see something on the bottom.
And of course, it will be diminishing in size and volume throughout that time. But based on, knowing that what I saw was over 100 years old, there's no way at all that in another 10 years that the wreck will be fully consumed, not even close.
But will what's left on the bottom of the Atlantic still resemble the massive luxury ocean liner that once held over 2,400 lives on board?
If you come back in 300 years, this will all be gone, this will still be here, and this will still be here. This may be sagged in, partially collapsed, some holes in it. This will still be here.
Over 100 years after her sinking, the Titanic's bow still looms majestically, as if time had stopped. But as she waits for the next round of expeditions, Titanic remains a legend and continues to rouse the passions of explorers and scientists around the world. Advances in technology and the evolution of the wreck will surely open up new avenues to explore the ghost of the abyss ever further. As always, despite the challenges faced, the impassioned Titanic explorers will race to preserve what they can before the ruins of the most famous of ships vanish forever.
There are definitely reasons to go back. I think we've seen some of the most beautiful things already, but the Titanic always keeps secrets.